Hello, my soccer universe. My name is Roland and this is Football Talk. I'm way too late to make a proper match review of what happened in the Champions League, the Europa League and the Conference League yesterday. It just didn't work out. And I already saw this coming on Thursday because my week went pear-shaped right there. And then, to be honest, the only day where I really watched attentively the action was on Tuesday, which was probably the best day. I followed a little bit on Wednesday while working like crazy. And on Thursday, I was so wiped that at halftime of the second slot, I just had to say, give in, have to go to bed. I barely saw anything and I didn't even see much of the first slot because I had commitments outside. So there you go. It's also kind of late. I'm shooting this now Saturday lunchtime. I wanted to make this as a video because, here and there it's nice to show my face, although this is still a podcast episode, so I don't think, except for the results that are going in and out, and the graphics that I produce, and maybe the jerseys that you can admire here in the background, if you hear this audio only, it's fine. You can look at it on YouTube later on, but, it is all fine. Overall, it will still be an audio thing. But because I'm so late, I think it doesn't make really much sense to talk about the games. And I had anyway the feeling, how much sense does it actually make to talk about these games? I mean, don't you feel the same thing? Yes, it is nice to see Real Madrid play Manchester City or Liverpool going to the San Siro and play Inter, big name games. But what's actually riding on them? The only thing that was compelling is the Mo Salah storyline and how will Liverpool respond. I think they did decent enough. I mean, it was a solid performance against a not so great Inter team. And the other one was the Xabi Alonso situation at Real Madrid. Also not great. Yeah, we had ugly scenes in Barcelona with the Frankfurt fans, who from one of the most lovable fan bases is becoming one of the most troublesome fan bases. Sorry to say, and it also speaks a little bit about how it's reported in Germany. They all talk about the great Frankfurt fans, and I love that in Germany, especially in Germany. Germany is the fourth biggest league, if not the third biggest league in Europe. But whenever they do something special in Europe, because German teams, except for Bayern as of late, never see themselves as huge teams. They might be huge teams in Germany, but when they go on a run, this is like the underdog that shows the bigwigs from Spain and Italy and England how it's done. An outsider story, a lovable story. It's not necessary. I mean, yes, when Frankfurt won the Europa League, I would agree this was a lovable story, but of Dortmund, I don't find a lovable story anymore. I only find a club that is losing its identity. This used to be maybe under Jürgen Klopp when they made the run, but for me, Dortmund have lost a lot of their magic as well. And so, because of these observations and me completely spacing out on the Europa League and the Conference League, yes, I saw the results. And yes, the Lincoln Red Imps are in 24th place in the Conference League. And yes, Gibraltar have made more points than Austria. But yes, that's a great story. That is a great story. And yes, Samsunspor in the Conference League is not top of the table anymore. Yes, the Italian teams did actually quite well. Scottish teams suck, Dutch teams suck. English teams are still super dominant. But because when you watch this, you don't really know about the jeopardy and what's really at stake unless you really take out this unwieldy table and figure it out for yourself. Yeah, they're in, they're out, but how far are they out? I really thought UEFA is killing their European competitions. I want to hang it up on the Champions League, which, go back 20 years, this was the pinnacle of the sport. I don't find it that anymore. And to me, this is the bigger thing. I think that the format change was necessary because the group stage also had become stale, but it was not the reform that I would have done. I would have actually gone back a little bit. But UEFA is under pressure, and when you're under pressure, you fumble things. UEFA is under pressure from FIFA and is under pressure from the big clubs. Those are the two big pressure points on UEFA. Because everyone sees the cash cow that is the Champions League and everyone wants to have a part of it. But then, due to that pressure, UEFA also has some problems to address that they are not able because of these pressure points. And the problem is, of course, the dominance of the Premier League over the next level of teams, and these teams then they are feeder clubs to the Premier League, so they need to be finding feeder teams from below, and so there's another gap opening up. I think Liga Portugal, the three big teams, are doing actually quite decently this year. But I'm looking at Eredivisie, the Belgian Pro League, and so on. Those are leagues that should step in. And, if you want to go Swiss League, Austrian League, Danish League, and all those kind of. But they have to get their act together. They need to be super organized, and that is also failing because the bigger teams are now sucking out all the talents. And in that sense, UEFA, with these 2 pressure points, is slowly killing off the competition. And I want to actually explore these problems, but also maybe suggest some solutions. Although I have to tell you, I'm not sure if I have the best solution in there, but at least certain things that I have now come up with that I think could make it more compelling to watch. Because one thing we can at least say, the knockout stage still does somewhat deliver. Although with the new format, I'm also not 100% sure that it does super deliver. But let's first talk about the problem. As I said, while reform was necessary, for me the big problem is that this whole table is too unwieldy. And it's really hard for anybody to say, okay, now Liverpool have beaten Inter. And we are far from ones, but what does it really mean? Inter is sitting on 12, Liverpool is sitting on 12. Both have still a chance to make it in or out. Or even worse, teams have actually more or less qualified already for the next round or got eliminated. What much talk was there? Villarreal is out. Villarreal is out. But it's Villarreal, no one is talking about it. And this year, when I look at the top 4, they're all doing really well. These are big teams, and last year we had at least PSG and Man City faltering. So we have an Arsenal, Bayern, PSG, Man City. I think we can say these are potentially the 4 best teams in Europe at the moment. And just looking at Champions League. Next 2 are Italians, and while Inter still riding high, they have a really tough program with Arsenal at home and Dortmund away, whereas Atalanta, just a point ahead, actually play Bilbao at home and Union Saint-Gilloise away. Atalanta will finish in the top 8. I am saying it right here. And that is, I think, slightly surprising. That much is for certain. I think the only ones of the big teams that are low is Barcelona. But Barcelona have their troubles, but I think they will get the job done. The biggest team that is in jeopardy at the moment, but still in, is Napoli, the Italian champions, sitting in a 23rd place. But are you really that much concerned, unless you're a Napoli fan, about that? And we know that Conte is not doing well in Europe. And yes, Benfica is on the outside looking in, but have a shot now, although they were bottom of the table not too long ago. And same thing goes now for Ajax, who suddenly got a first win. As you see, this is not what I hear when we talk about the games. The big storylines coming out of this match day is the Mo Salah situation, and is Xabi Alonso now staying for another week. And Arsenal is still winning, but even that win at Club Brugge, no one really mentioned. And yes, Barcelona turned it around against Frankfurt, but even there, then the fans were the big talking point. It's seriously, stuff is missing. In the Conference League, we had a second to last match day. We have a single match day on the last one. This is also something horrific, I have to say. The Conference League is shoved away. It's anyway made shorter, and then you have 3 games in late November and December when you shouldn't even playing football anymore. But yes, the Conference League doesn't get much attention. But we have teams that have qualified for certain way, and many teams that have been eliminated. But unless you're in a country that needs to care about the Conference League, like Austria, where there's a team in there that is bottom of the table, 0 points, they're eliminated. This is a big story. But honestly, the bigger story was of how bad Rapid is than that they're already eliminated. So, for me, the biggest problem, and yes, the old group stage had a problem. The old group stage had a problem that after 4 match days, pretty much half of the groups were already decided. And then on the 5th match day, the remaining ones went through. Maybe one on the last day was compelling, but you had to split it up onto 2 match days. So this was a problem of the group stage. You also had the problem that you gave the Champions League the prime spot Tuesday, Wednesday. The new cycle is that you have reports on Monday, you have reports on Thursday. Everyone is overlooking your other two competitions. At least wouldn't it be nice to give those a little bit more spotlight. So for me the first thing is make the lower competitions a little bit more attractive by giving it at least some spotlight. How about give the Champions League the two late slots on Tuesday and on Wednesday. Then on Tuesday in the early slot, put one slot of Conference League games. On Wednesday you do the same thing with the Europa League. And then on Thursday, first Conference League, early, Europa League late. Just as a basic concept, and yes, with time difference you might switch things around, because I think it's also not fair to teams from Eastern Europe to play in the late slot, or from teams from Western Europe, but there it's not as much of a problem. But I always find it hard for teams that are in Eastern Europe in a complete different time zone, like Turkey or whatever. If you're in the late slot, your game kicks off almost 10 o'clock or later. Can make accommodations for that. But I think this would be a way to actually make already the Europa League and the Conference League more attractive. So let's talk about that, and then we'll talk about forward. The other way to make it more attractive, and actually you had it, you just needed some tweaking. I know many didn't like it because, and I hate this argument when people say, yeah, the fan doesn't understand it. Humans are more capable of understanding things than you would think. But the teams from the Champions League that finished in third dropped actually down into the Europa League. You got some big name teams in there. And still teams from the Europa League ended up winning. But then the knockout stage was actually lifted up. And for the Conference League to a lesser degree, but also really good teams came down and made actually the Conference League interesting. This is something that has to be considered. Also, this big unwieldy table, it's not ideal. And especially if you have only 8 games. We always say you should not look at a league table after, 8 games in or something like that. Now we have a super huge league table. Everything can change. No jeopardy there. I mean, you have 24 out of 36 teams qualifying. Yes, 12 go out, but this is basically to give the small teams a little bit here. It's some money, you get some big name experience. Maybe you get 2 big teams. The seeding system is also a little bit... Nah, that's not working. That's really not working. So for me, make it by the scheduling a little bit more attractive for the lower level teams. Also, the dropping down was not a bad idea. However, what I would suggest now is not only dropping down, give Europa League teams that finish high and Conference League teams to finish high to actually get into the knockout stage of the higher competition. Make it permeable. How would you do it? Well, I think now it's actually relatively easy. Have teams from 17 to 24 play a playoff. Reduce it down to 6 match days. And in reality, we have a single Champions League round in September. We have a single Europa League round to kick it off, and we have a single Conference League round late on as well. So you have here match days. You can fit actually 2 more if you want it into the fall. Not that I'm in favor of making more games. Don't get me wrong. And we have to shift this around. But let's talk about the format first before we talk about scheduling. If you have such a table, take these and then make playoffs. The top 8 of the Europa League play against 17 to 24 of the Champions League in the playoff in January. Winner goes into the Champions League, loser goes into the Europa League. That would make the Europa League, the top 8 spot, a whole lot more compelling. Because suddenly you have the chance to go in there and skip this stupid playoff round that you have. This would be a playoff round that I think would be interesting. And now I think it is really doable. And same thing goes between Europa League and Conference League. Have a promotion relegation element in there. I also think it's not realistic because we know if you skip rounds it doesn't necessarily help. But let's say if the top 4 are at least already assured a quarterfinal spot, this would also make the top 4 more compelling than, making a round of 16. Eyeballing there. But to me, the biggest problem here is the huge table. It is, and I'm someone who can really absorb this, but it's really hard to follow this. And who is going up and who is going down in the last match day is an absolute mess. You cannot even split it up anymore, because you have to all play them at the same time. So that is also nonsensical. What I would suggest is to, split it up. Should we make 2 leagues of 18? Potentially. Should we make 4 leagues of 9? It's also a possibility. There you have at least then the chance with 9 match days. At the moment we have 8, to potentially have everyone play each other. Then you have, if you have leagues of 9, you have then spare teams. What do the spare teams do? Well, if you would have leagues of 9, you would not have 4 pots of 9 teams, but 9 pots of 4 teams. The teams that are resting are presumably all from the same pot, have them play each other as a bonus game to kind of decide a positioning game or whatever. That would make more sense. At least one can follow it. This was for me the best thing about the group stage. You knew, yes, the group stage at the end was not compelling, but you knew what's at stake. These are my 3 opponents and I have to play them twice. And I think UEFA here means dropped also the ball by making this, that the match day 1 is the same as match day 6, 2 is the same as 5, and 3 and 4. So there you had the double element in there. You should have had the double element throughout. You should have that. Let's say we have a January, we have an October, we have a September, we have an October, we have a November window. In September, 2 teams are paired, they play each other twice. Same thing in October, same thing in November. And to top it all off, and I've said this before, but it didn't get much traction, but I said this before, it would be fun then if the points are not given based on the 2 results separately, but combined. Give 3 points for an outright winner of the 2-legged affair. If it goes to overtime or penalty shot, we can fudge on that. Give each team a point and the winner gets 2 points. That makes it already more exciting. Because then mano a mano, right here, September, I play against these guys. How they never came up with that idea is beyond me. But this, to me, would have improved the group stage almost immediately. Because from the get-go, you have kind of a knockout character in the group stage. And this would have been an easy fix. But I also know that we're not going to go back to 32 teams, although I think 32 is a super format. 36, yeah, the only way you can go here is not 48, but 64. And let's face it, combine Europa League and Conference League, you could make 64 teams and maybe then, groups of 6. So this is how I could make it more attractive. Now, the big pressures are, of course, that UEFA are under is that FIFA wants to basically diminish the Champions League. The big clubs want to diminish the Champions League. And as I said, the other problem is that this discrepancy, that especially for the Champions League, the dominance of the Premier League is becoming a problem. Because there will be many English teams in it. It's great for English fans, but I'm looking at a bigger picture. We had the same thing in the 90s. When Italian teams almost automatically, they will go to the final of what was then the UEFA Cup, which was almost the equivalent of the Champions League. It was normal to have 2 Italian teams in there. And then you have an Italian team in the Champions League final. Now we have the same thing here with the Premier League. And we had a similar story in the 2000s and early 2010s with the Spanish teams, because then the Spanish league was the dominant one. There will always be such dominance, but I don't want to make big things because, back then they also said the Serie A, you can never catch it. I think the Premier League will at one point potentially also blow up, although I don't quite see it. It's that the other leagues also need to get their act together. But what we didn't have back then is this multi-club ownership and this feeder club system. That, every club is now run on selling players. Unless you're a Premier League club, then you buy up a lot of players. Most of them flop and you can give them to other teams. Because you have so much money, you don't really need to care about it. This is a systemic problem. But then you also have the problem that FIFA says, the Europeans have all the money and the voting base in FIFA is not Europe. It's the rest of the world against Europe. And Europe can try to cozy up to CONMEBOL, but that's only 10 more votes. Yes, those are the two biggest soccer powers, but it's not happening. But at least at the Club World Cup, we had Brazilian teams that were somewhat competitive. But that had their own reasons, because European teams were at the end of the season, Brazilian clubs were in the middle of the season. Also, I think the climate was playing more in the Brazilian clubs' favor. But at least we had some competitiveness there, in that sense. But I fear that the Club World Cup is only to grow, because there's a whole lot of financial backing in there, and also the pressure from the big clubs is only gonna grow. And then UEFA have to give in. Yeah, we have to give out more places. Speaking, giving out more places, the other thing that is so little regarded is this talk about this additional Champions League place. This should be published way more. And this needs to be also a lot more tangible. Now, who are the teams or the leagues that are in the running? Yes, the Premier League will get the other spot. Spain is, I think, currently in second place, but Italy is moving up. I think it's Germany that actually has at the moment the biggest chance, but the Italian teams are catching up. Spanish teams are having actually quite a poor season. So yeah, but this is something that is sideshows. This is not really publicized properly. This is also something that could be extremely compelling, that would actually make fans cheer for the teams from their own league. I know this is hard, but at least some more unity could happen. So for me, with this pressure from the big clubs, and I hated the Super League at the time because it was not a meritocracy. However, the one thing that they got right is we need a league that allows the big clubs to make more money. But it was only those big clubs. What we need is that the wealth is spread more evenly around. And the problem is that the Premier League at the moment, English is the dominant language. So naturally you gravitate towards an English-speaking world. It's much harder to get experts talk about the Italian league. And Italy is anyway very insular, and this is a problem. I don't even want to talk about this now, but we could talk about that a lot. La Liga at least have a huge Spanish-speaking population that they also could freely pander to. So these are already two advantages that Spain and England do have. But the other leagues need to realize that and pander accordingly and make adjustments accordingly. And not look only at the German market, only at the Italian market, only at the French market. The only team that is thinking globally, of course they have the money, is PSG. But PSG, I have to say for me, PSG is almost acting like the sole Italian team. It's crazy. But there needs to be a little bit more spreading around, and I think UEFA is doing the central marketing. They are saying that UEFA needs to a little bit have more control on the leagues themselves, and that's not gonna fly. I know. The free market is killing us all. It's killing us all. The rich are getting rich and the poor are getting poor. We need a social system for European football. And yes, when I say this, I see that it's just one small part in a larger problem that we have in the entire world, and I don't want to even go that big now. But everything that you see happening with football clubs, you see also in society, blah, 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 and everyone for themselves because, individualism and not together. And with all the things that, we are not buying talents from foreign leagues because they're cheaper than homegrown talents, and then the national team suffers. Look at Italy, for instance. Yeah, and I'm saying a lot about Italy because this is the league that next to the Austrian Bundesliga, but the Serie A is really the league that I care about most. In any case, as I said, I think probably, let's go back, the best solution is permeability a little bit more. But I also think that it could make the league phase, if you want to keep it a little bit more exciting by, for instance, having winners play against winners, losers against losers. You have a true Swiss system like they use in esports, for instance. I don't follow esports, but I read an article about that, and this makes a whole lot more sense. However, the logistics behind it might be hard because, which winners will play which winners, which losers will play which losers. And where do you do the cut? Let's say if a team that has won 5 games advances, great. Maybe it has to be 4 games to really make sure that we get the format. Also, with 36 teams, it doesn't really work. But maybe here you have the chance, 64 teams, and you can make a true system. And you reward teams that win early by having some days off. Maybe that's the sweet spot. What do you think? Please drop a line below. Is UEFA really killing their competitions? I really think so. To me, it's much less compelling than it was 20 years ago, when I knew the stakes. Even the knockout stage seems much less compelling. I mean, it's not as bad as we had it, for instance, 5 to 10 years ago, when I knew it was the 2 Spanish giants plus Bayern Munich and maybe a 4th team from England. At least we have some variability now, but it's still the same countries. Oh, how I would have wished Ajax make that final. That would have given me some hope. Has given me already some hope that they almost were in the final. Any case, please drop a line below what you think about this subject. Subscribe to this podcast, either on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you do it to actually support it. Also tell somebody else. Leave a comment below, and one thing's for certain, I'll talk to you soon about more things in my soccer universe. Bye!